The march earlier in the year, but of course that never happened, and now he's striving in the last two Grand Prix for Minardi. Well, Senna on his way to provisionally should be the fastest lap.
Yeah, Katayama was the man who had the quickest time, and he was the only person on the circuit to complete a flying lap, but Senna comfortably quickest at that first intermediate time, and now onto the fastest part of the Suzuki circuit. And we expect to see a top speed in the region of 185, 190 miles an hour, 303 kilometers, 0.6, surprisingly little quicker at that first intermediate point than Katayama. Now into this very fiddly, and before the McLaren team confirmed very shortly after Portugal that he was going to lead or be the joint .1 driver along with Damon Hill at Williams. And Häkkinen just looks up, walks away, no problem.
Well, a 39.457 for Ayrton Senna, which is the fastest lap so far, which is of course quicker than he did this morning, but time still very much away from last year's pole position time, which was Nigel Mansell on the 1:36.37, but the lap record in qualifying comes from Gerhard Berger, and as at the last two Grand Prix, that time was set in 1991. When Gerhard did a mega 1:34.700, which is 138 mile an hour average.
Well, qualifying tires, of course, made such a big difference here at Suzuka, and coming out of corners like Designer Curve and Herpen Curve, all these strange names. It is a very, very difficult circuit, and of course the compound that Goodyear provided is one compound harder than they had in 1992 because of the reduction in tire, wheel and size. And there's no Formula One testing here at all, so it is a difficult circuit to judge. And the other factor that is a big difficulty here is what is the weather going to be like. Now, right now we've had very good weather, the ambience in the middle 20s, just about ideal in fact, so you never know what tire to bring, so teams, or Goodyear certainly, will err on the side of caution, and with either temperature or wear being the principal concerns. That's something the teams really don't have any clue about until they start on Friday morning.
Well, looking at Ayrton Senna, especially when he came into the chicane, the car looks very twitchy indeed.
Well, I noticed at the end of the straight at the first flying lap that the car looked to be bumping or porpoising a lot. Now that's an aerodynamic effect, and it is very, very detrimental to the car's handling and to the aerodynamics. And it's also very upsetting for a driver because you're never quite sure how much grip you've got. And well, we really want to have a look at Mika Häkkinen to see whether his car is suffering likewise, or whether that's just something Senna has got that he's got to dial out of that car.
32 pole positions, 51 Grand Prix victories and 4 world champions. That's what Alain Prost has won in his Grand Prix career so far. And of course there's only 2 Grand Prix to go before he retires. Well, he had a very difficult morning. He did a total of 3 laps and then had an engine problem with his V10 Renault engine. Very unusual for the Renault engine to have a problem, John.
Well, we've seen relatively few problems throughout the season with Renault, and Alain Prost lost very valuable track time, and particularly Suzuka is the one circuit, as I said, that none of the regular teams are able to test on. And time lost here for Prost, who didn't race, remember, last year in Japan. He was having his sabbatical year, coming here with an active car and such a sophisticated car as the Williams Renault. Those 3 laps really didn't tell him anything at all. So at this point what we're really seeing from Alain Prost is not an out-and-out qualifying run. It's just familiarising himself with Suzuka and just learning what this car does on these very unique curves. The surface is different. It is a circuit really where the more miles you do, the more you get to know it. It's, if you like, a mini version of the old Nürburgring circuit, and very often people who had the knowledge of the circuit were quicker than those that were actually better drivers. Well, the other Frenchman here this weekend who's pretty spectacular is Jean Alesi, and 1 month ago Alesi lit the hearts of all Italian race fans when he led for 15 laps in Portugal. And really, is this the resurgence of the Ferrari team are pulling well over to the left. And this is now the quickest corner on the circuit, down to that notorious and the scene of very many controversial moments as Alesi comes into the pits. And the helicopter view down now onto the long downhill. In fact, you can't really see on TV, but that from the chicane right down to the first corner, there's a drop of about 200 feet. It looks dead flat from the television picture, and it's quite a long straight as well, 185 miles an hour before you go into fourth gear through this sequence of curves. And really, this is where the knowledge of Suzuka is so important, because you've got to remember the sequence. You've got to place the car correctly on the entry into the first of those long sweeping S-bends, because if you don't, you'll be wrong all the way through. And here now, this is the final part, very quick indeed, into sixth gear, 175 miles an hour. Now down into fourth gear again, short squirt, then down all the way to second gear. Easy to make a mistake. It's a long circuit, a long lap. Precision and memory very, very important. And Alain Prost, well, the memory coming back from 1991, but with a completely different car.
Alain Prost just been a half a second slower than Ayrton Senna. And there's teammate Damon Hill, the man who was fastest this morning in the untimed session, but wasn't happy with the car. And Damon's one of those drivers. He's here for the first time. He's driving at Suzuka for the first time. And he was saying, like, I sort of, the first few laps, I got lost in all the S's. I sort of was very hard to remember where I had to place the car.
Well, all I can tell you is I drove a Williams Honda here in 1987 on a very, very cold winter's day, and even after doing about 15 laps, just to find that sequence was very difficult. So Damon coming here for the first time in anger at a Grand Prix. I'm not at all surprised that he also was confronted with the difficulty of remembering that sequence. And as I said just a moment ago, if you lose the sequence, the lap is completely useless. It's lost. Well, back to Senna, who's out now, continuing his run.
Well, Ayrton, who
coming into the pits,
goes into the pits, but I think, John, the team until about 2.5 weeks ago had hoped to run a Lamborghini engine car here in Japan. But of course the announcement was made last week that McLaren's going to have Peugeot engines from next year onwards. That stopped those plans.
Well, I don't know who it was that hoped to run the Lamborghini engine. Certainly I know Mika Häkkinen and Ayrton Senna were very impressed with the engine's power and its overall performance. As far as I'm aware, there was never any intent on the part of McLaren. Now, that's not saying what Lamborghini's ideas or thoughts were, or Chrysler's thoughts were on this, but as far as I'm aware, there was no intention to run a Lamborghini engine car in either of these two final Grand Prix. And of course, all that now is over its history, because McLaren have announced just 10 days ago a 4-year deal with Peugeot, and that is going to be, I think, very, very exciting indeed for Formula One. And certainly I look forward to 1994 with great anticipation, because the battles that we're going to see between those two French giants, Renault and Peugeot, in Grand Prix racing, I think is going to be another classic period in Formula One history.
Michael Schumacher, the man who won his second Grand Prix in Portugal 3 weeks ago, while he's overtaken Eddie Irvine, now 0.7 of a second quicker than Ayrton Senna. So Schumacher on his way to provisional pole position, tried four-wheel steering and again was mighty impressive with it during the morning session. And Michael Schumacher's time, 1:39.053, and that for the moment puts a smile on Tom Walkinshaw's and Flavio Briatore's face, because that is quickest.
Well, I'll tell you, Allard, if you blinked, you'd have missed that smile.
We're going to take a short break here on Eurosport, and please rejoin us after that for more qualifying from Japan. Welcome back here on Eurosport, watching Alain Prost.
A lot more potential within the Williams car, and also every lap Damon does, he will get to know and become more familiar with this circuit. But back with Berger now, 300 kilometers into the fifth gear, very, very fast left-hand corner, and now down into this tortuous and frustrating chicane. Really, it's so important to enter the chicane, let's say slowly, be clean in the middle of it, but then get the power on early and drive down across the start-finish line, and Berger provisionally quickest.
So we now have Gerhard Berger on the provisional pole position. Then it's Michael Schumacher, 0.03 of a second behind Berger. Then Mika Häkkinen in third position, and Ayrton Senna is fourth. And there's the man who's just been bumped off of pole. But Gerhard Berger, John, the man who shunted in the Portuguese Grand Prix due to active suspension failure, shunted again when we were testing there the week after the Grand Prix, but a man who knows Suzuka well. He's got the fastest ever lap around the Suzuka circuit, that 1:34.700, and of course that same year he won the Grand Prix, although I think we must say Ayrton Senna handed it to him, but he won it.
Well, Damon Hill now about to commence his first flying lap. So Damon will be, let's say, anxious to re-establish himself at the top of the official qualifying lists. But it's always competitive here, qualifying, and when it counts for real, that's when the quality of his principal competitors is going to be apparent. And we've seen Schumacher, Senna, Prost and Häkkinen out, and Damon came out a little bit later to start his first run than some of those others, and hopefully he will have a target to aim for, but at the same time he's going to find slower traffic, as you see there, one of the two Minardis, but staying sufficiently offline.
Well, that's the footwork, and doesn't need a very hard guess to guess who the driver is. We see real-time telemetry, as always, I think, John, in Japan, isn't it? I mean, we've always seen these little electronic gadgets here.
Well, they've got something new this weekend, and I don't know whether we're going to see it in this session, but in Akuya Katayama's Tyrrell Yamaha, there's an additional camera on the car. It's one of these fiber optic type lenses pointing down at Katayama's feet. Now, whether that's something you really want to see or not, we don't know, but we may get to see it later in this session. But it will indicate just how much dexterity is involved in using, in the case of the Tyrrell, 2 of the 3 pedals that are available. And Suzuki making his way down the quickest part of the straight. Of course, this Mugen Honda engine that the footwork team have enjoyed will be in the back of a Lotus in 1994. And there was at one point discussion or thought that Aguri Suzuki may choose to go with Honda and Mugen to Lotus. It was certainly a possibility, but that now appears to be not the case, and Lotus are on the point of announcing that they have secured yet again the services of Johnny Herbert, who will lead the team, and he will be partnered by Pedro Lamy, who is here this weekend in place of Alessandro Zanardi, the man, of course, who had that appalling shunt in Spa. And in fact, Zanardi was meant to be back in the car for Suzuka and Australia, but during a recent test at Silverstone, on his 4th lap out on a track that was damp, he made a mistake. He went off on the exit of club, and at that point the team, I think, frankly said enough is enough. We can't take a risk anymore, and Alessandro was asked not to bother to come to Japan and Australia, and Pedro Lamy was phoned up, and he is in the car here for these final 2 races.
And of course the whole of the 94 season.
Indeed, that was also confirmed after Portugal, and well, I have to say, I think that it's unfortunate for Zanardi that he made that mistake, but he did, and the penalty he has paid is that he's not in the car. But really, for the team and looking towards the future, the best thing they could do is put Lamy in for these 2 races. It gives him experience of these Grand Prix for 94, and his gain is Zanardi's loss.
A 1:39.393 for Damon Hill. That is currently 4th fastest. And Damon, we saw missing the apex on the in the chicane.
Well, I think just watching Damon, his lack of familiarity with Suzuka you can see, because he's not allowing himself or the car to use their full potential. In some of the corners, the car is not using the full width of the circuit, and that is just simply down to confidence and lack of familiarity. And that is what happens at Suzuka. You've got to know the place. You've got to allow yourself to be free and let the car work freely. And if you're holding it back in certain parts, the time will just drift away.
Already 0.9 of a second slower than Gerhard Berger at this point. And the world champion Alain Prost discussing his car, I think, with Patrick Head.
Yes, the broad back of Patrick Head totally eclipsing Alain Prost. And well, now the championship is won for the drivers and likewise for the constructors, Williams. But nonetheless, Williams' team are here to win and come second. It's the first time in reality that Damon Hill will have a free hand in a Grand Prix this year. He will be able to go and race for a victory. He will not be. There's nothing to be gained any lower. Alain Prost has the championship now sewn up. And Damon, I know, was looking forward to Suzuka and to Australia in a fortnight's time.
39.297. Small improvement, but no improvement in position. So the top four is Gerhard Berger in the Ferrari, then Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, Mika Häkkinen third, and fourth is Damon Hill, just in front of Ayrton Senna. So that's a top five here in Suzuka. And there's Michael Schumacher trying to regain pole position.
Just interesting to compare Damon Hill and Schumacher. You can see how much more confidence Schumacher has in himself, in the car. I mean, Damon has not been entirely happy throughout this morning's session, and I suspect also looking at it here this afternoon. Whereas Schumacher, you can see the confidence. It's all over the screen. He's using the car. He's going from inside of the circuit right out to the very outside, and you can only do that if you know the car will permit it, first of all, but also it's your knowledge of what is a very, very demanding circuit indeed.
Schumacher being slower than Berger, a second at the moment, and going through that 180R, I think it's called, John, isn't it? That corner, that very fast left-hander.
Well, they've got all sorts of names for these corners, and depending on which map you look at it, the name of it, we don't really have a name, but it's one of the unusual names for the circuit. And there you see in the background there's a whole funfair complex. It's called Honda Land, because in fact Honda own this entire complex, and it is in use continually for testing, for manufacturer testing, for tire testing. And in fact, way back in 1987, when I drove the Honda turbo engine Williams here, we had to get off the circuit precisely at 1 o'clock because Bridgestone were doing tire tests, and literally at 1 o'clock I was partway around the circuit and there were flags waving, and I had to come off the circuit before I even got back to the pits. They wouldn't even let me drive back because they blocked what they call the crossing, and the car then had to be taken off the circuit public roads to get back into the pits. That's how they operate Suzuka.
Well, there's Schumacher. I think this is a wasted lap, or at least not a very fast lap, and we're waiting for his other lap to start. A new lap. Michael Schumacher currently in second position. And I must say, John, he drove a brilliant race in Portugal, and especially when Alain Prost tried to take away the lead from Michael, he sort of really said, listen, Alain, I'm going to win this Grand Prix. You can come second and win the World Championship. And that's exactly what he did.
It certainly was a very, very fine victory, but I must say Alain Prost was very cautious. He realized that Schumacher did want to win the Grand Prix, and he wasn't going to take any risks jeopardizing himself winning the Drivers' Championship. So he did look down the inside a couple of times, saw that Schumacher wasn't about to play, and decided, well, that's the right thing to do. I'll take second place, and 6 points will make me world champion. And but had the situation been different, had Prost at the Williams headquarters down in Didcot, discussing plans. Well, you see, just provisionally quickest Alain Prost, somewhat more nonchalant about Senna's time, not really very concerned about what is Senna running wider there. Quickest lap 38.942, and that was Senna's 8th lap. He's backed off now, and well, I'm not entirely sure whether that's going to be sufficient to secure the pole position, provisional pole that is, on Friday afternoon here in Suzuka. And you watch this, as Senna came round, they were slightly offline on that slowing down lap, and you could see the plume of dust.
Well, there's the camera you were talking about earlier on, John. On the right top of your screen, there's the feet of Ukio Katayama. And I think Katayama, John, is just the driver that is fairly secure at Tyrrell for next year, isn't he?
Well, there's talks about having new partners, one of which is retaining Andrea de Cesaris. The other is, of course, JJ Leto has been mentioned in conjunction with a drive at Tyrrell. And there you see the dancing feet of Ukio Katayama. Very pretty indeed. And this is the Olympics. Certainly would get very high marks for artistic impression as well as the actual, well, you can hardly see any throttle movement at all. The throttle pedal really such a short movement. And then top left of the corner you see the steering column coming down through a universal joint, then takes it down into the steering box. And this is on the quickest part of the circuit. Let's see if Katayama, well, a fairly heavy brake, and then all the way down now into the chicane, all the way down into second gear. The V10 Yamaha engine, undoubtedly the best that Yamaha can produce for this Grand Prix. And now this downhill, you get more impression of the drop. In fact, it is, as I said, quite a sharp drop indeed, all the way down into the first part of these long sequence of lefts and rights. Mika Häkkinen now back out completing a lap.
Well, John, Katayama, who's up in the top 10, which is a very good performance, I must say, from the Japanese driver.
It is a good performance. I would have expected it from Katayama here. Likewise, I know that Yamaha will work particularly hard. I mean, they work hard throughout the year, but this is the most important Grand Prix for Yamaha, as it is for any Japanese driver or company. And Yamaha have got the ability. They produce stunning motorcycle engines, and they have got the capacity to produce a good Formula One engine, but it's got to be right, in the right place at the right time. And the Japanese Grand Prix usually coincides with all those factors.
John, going back to next year's calendar, Argentina and Brazil, provisional dates March 20 and 27th. So the team's going down to Argentina the week before, I suppose, and then a dash to Brazil to prepare the cars for the Brazilian Grand Prix.
Very tight schedule. It's difficult doing flyaway races weekend to weekend. Of course, nobody knows yet what this circuit in Buenos Aires is going to be like, and I'm sure teams would prefer longer to prepare cars between Grand Prix, but probably the deciding factor will be costs. It is simply cheaper to have weekends back to back than to have a clear weekend between, and I'm sure that when the calendar is actually firmed up, that you will only have some 4 days in reality between the end of the Grand Prix in Argentina and scrutineering. And look at Schumacher all over the place coming through. Well, in fact, I got it wrong. That was designer curve. He's now into the hairpin bend, and
a little quicker than Ayrton,
marginally so. And what is important now is that's only the first third of this lap. There's still a long way to go, and it is through Spoon Curve, which is what we see Schumacher coming up to. All the gains that you've made. Well, it looks like it. He picked up time all the way around that lap.
A 1:38.589 is currently the fastest time. So Michael Schumacher, currently the fastest driver. And there was a quick spin from Andrea de Cesaris. Well, you could see his feet working during that spin.
Well, he got it absolutely sideways and on the grass, but he managed to keep it running. And Well, another lap lost for Andrea.
So while Michael Schumacher is fastest, we're going to take a short break here on Eurosport. Please rejoin us after that. Welcome back here on Eurosport. Alain Prost on his second set of tyres, and don't forget, basically Alain Prost has only done about 9 laps so far around the Suzuka circuit. So can we say it's an uphill struggle to get pole for Prost?
Well, I think what Prost will do is use all his experience, and Frank Williams suddenly realises there's a camera pointing in to him. But Alain Prost has got so much experience and he knows what he has to do, and that's the important thing. He will not take an unnecessary risk. He will have certainly altered the car between the first and second run. He only had, in reality, 3 laps in the morning session and only a further 7 to date. So it's a very small amount of running here, and there's a man going back to the most exciting man currently, I think, in Formula One. He makes Formula One look exciting, and this is what really we've been crying out for such a long time.
I believe it's 26 of those.
Well, that's spectacular is the understatement of the day, I think, for Mika Häkkinen.
Well, let's say Mika's Michael finishes.
It is indeed. And he's got a little bit of oversteer, but doesn't seem to worry him at all.
John, talking about spectacular drivers, I understand Mika is sort of confirmed at McLaren for 1994, but he hasn't got a teammate yet, and the McLaren team was trying to get Michael Schumacher. They're losing Ayrton Senna, and they're looking into quite a few young drivers for next year. And one of them is the countryman of me.
Well, I think that Jos Verstappen has done such a stunning job in that test in Estoril a month ago that he suddenly put himself right at the top of people's list of preferences. I think the problem McLaren have is that they've got a star in Mika Häkkinen, and I know they would like to complement him with another driver of that level or quality. Currently there doesn't appear to be anybody free that McLaren would prefer, so they've got a list of people that they're probably going to try, and Verstappen is at the other end of the spectrum, and he's a guy in Formula 3 who has got undoubtedly tremendous potential, and I know he's been in discussions, as you knew, Allard, with McLaren in relation to a testing contract with the team, and the prospect of a test very shortly is imminent for Verstappen at McLaren. Now, whether McLaren and Marlboro and all the associated companies, suppliers and sponsors, not least of all Peugeot, who are now the engine supplier, would be happy to take a chance with somebody who is so unproven, that's a matter for Ron Dennis and the McLaren team and his investors, as he calls them, to discuss. In many respects, I think it's a chance that the team could afford to take. On the other hand, Mark Blundell and JJ Leto, many other young drivers are available. So it's a question, I think, of time, and McLaren, I think, have decided that they're not going to rush into making any decision who will partner Mika Häkkinen in 94 and beyond until certainly the season is over, and maybe not even as late as Christmas time.
Well, I know Verstappen's due to drive it after Adelaide, so I don't think we're going to see a decision before that. The man's stunningly quick, but as you say, lacks a bit of experience.
Well, the one thing that a team like McLaren can do is give a driver mileage, and the most important thing for any young driver to have before he commences a Grand Prix career is in that off-season get as many miles, as many laps on as many different circuits as is possible. And with the kind of test setup that McLaren operate, that opportunity would be there. And in fact, there's no greater testament to that McLaren backup than that of Mika Häkkinen, in fact, because Mika, he had his first race of the year in Estoril, and he had more miles in the McLaren than Senna or Michael Andretti, and that included the Grand Prix that Senna and Andretti took part in prior to going to Estoril. So the value of off-season or whatever time in a car is so important, and if Verstappen, let's say, was given the opportunity to join Häkkinen, I'm quite sure that in the first Grand Prix, even though he may not know the circuit, he would know his car and the team, and they would know him. that is something that you can't put a value upon.
Well, we are watching Alain Prost, 0.1 seconds slower than Michael Schumacher at the first intermediate. Well, we just saw the top 8 on our screen a couple of minutes ago. And Prost is always going as fast as he has to, but now he finds himself way down, and he's just got to go for it, I suppose.
Well, I think a number of things are happening, Allard. One is that Alan has won the championship, so the priority is a different one. Now, well, he's picked up on that second intermediate, 2/10 quicker than Michael Schumacher, but there's a lot of pressure directly behind him, not only from Damon Hill, his teammate.
1:38.587, and that's just, oh, Michael, yes, you have been beaten by the world champion Alain Prost, who lost a lot of time during that last section then, John, because he was 2/10 up on Schumacher and ends up 0.002 of a second faster than the German.
Well, just enough, as you saw Michael Schumacher, a wry smile on his face as Eric Comas is being pushed away to safety, having stopped out, and there we see it. And that's just after the end of the pit straight as you make the climb up through those tortuous rights and lefts, and whether that's a spin or whether that's just simply mechanical failure, we can't tell you at this time. But Schumacher...
Well, Schumacher is second fastest, still on the front row of the grid, and Alain Prost is on pole. Now, John, this is very important. You might think like, well, the top 5, Prost, Schumacher, Häkkinen, Senna and Hill. Tomorrow things will change, but as we know, a lot of things can change in Japan, especially the weather.
Weather is very, very unpredictable. We remember last year that Saturday was a complete washout. So again, knowledge and getting on with the job in hand on Friday is absolutely vital. The day is perfect, absolutely ideal conditions. What will happen on Saturday? We are expecting similar weather, but the weather fronts do change very rapidly indeed. Well, this is Senna really just cruising around, making his way back to the pits, and that very, very long corner, that's one of those places on the circuit you never know where you ought to be. Now into Spoon Curve, a much easier corner to line up for, and then the exit, that's where we saw Alesi just drop his wheel off the curb, and you see the mark still on the track from where Alesi bumped into the barrier fairly heavily, but no damage to Alesi personally, and what really looked more superficial damage to the left front of his Ferrari.
So let's we're nearly at the end of the session, and let's just have a quick look. The top 5, because Senna is going into the pits, and I think that's the end of his run, has not changed. Alain Prost, provisional pole position, Michael Schumacher second, Mika Häkkinen third, Ayrton Senna fourth, and Damon Hill fifth. That might be an unusual top 5, but let's not forget that the difference between Alain Prost in pole position and Damon Hill in 5th position is only 0.4 of a second. So that is a very competitive top 5, John.
Delighted to see it, Allard, and it's something that really I'm not surprised about. I did anticipate that the 3 Ford HB users, in Senna we see one of them there, the Benetton team with Michael Schumacher, the other Mika Häkkinen, the third, we're going to be pushing each other very hard, and in the process we're going to draw themselves very close to the 2 Williams Renaults, and there Alain Prost still pounding away, currently quickest with 1:38.587, and he's just on his way into the pits. So everything very much as Prost would hope for, but not enough time between himself and Schumacher, Häkkinen and Senna.
John, interesting is that Berger and Alesi, there we see them 6th and 7th. Although they've done 9 and 5 laps, they've set their fastest lap on their 2nd flying lap, which is, I think, a very good performance. If they could have improved, basically for Gerhard Berger, it's half a second to pole position. There we see the rest of the top 16. As I said before, good performance from Okio Katayama. Eddie Irvine in 11th position, and there we see the rest. John?
Well, I think Ferrari certainly, both Alesi went off, of course, that didn't help him. Berger's times 2 out of 10 laps. I don't know what the problems were, but one thing is for sure at Suzuka, although it's a big circuit, 3.6 miles in length, overtaking and getting blocked in qualifying, always a big problem here.
Thank you for watching today. We'll be back tomorrow. From John Watson and Allard Kelf, bye for now. See you later.
The Formula One World Championship was brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team. In association with Champion, Pioneer, Hitachi, Elf Petrol World Champion, and Goodyear.